Right now, there were so many people that were watching this Memphis Mayoral Forum last night to see the top candidates there and what they had to say one final time before early voting begins. Of course, early voting opens today, runs through the 30th, Election Day on October 5th. Want to talk more, do a little bit of a deep dive on the Memphis Mayoral Forum last night with city reporter for the Daily Memphian, Sam Hardiman, back on the Action News 5 digital desk. Sam, it's been a long time. First off, I want to see how you're doing, man.
I'm great, Andrew. I hope you can hear me okay.
I can hear you just fine. You look great. You're ready to go. I appreciate you joining us. It's like old times. Haven't seen you in a few months, but this is certainly a worthy time to have you on and talk about that Memphis Mayoral Forum. First off, let's look at a 30,000 foot view here. What did you think of the forum overall?
Broadly, I thought the questions were good. I thought that the candidates seemed very grateful that they could be sitting for the entire forum. This is the first forum, I believe, or at least first televised one, where they were allowed to sit down the entire time, which I think mattered in terms of their answers and not having to use that much energy. Next, I would think that we did hear a little bit new. And I think that throughout this past week, we've had this week of forums. We've really seen the candidates focus on each other more during the forums and sort of try to contrast themselves, while throughout like the early part of this election season, they were kind of giving state answers and this is my policy and not really pointing to the other person and saying this is why we differ.
You know, I noticed, Sam, at least for me watching this one, and I didn't necessarily watch the entirety of some of the other forums that they had in this election season, but I felt like I saw the most contrast of separation between all the candidates at the very end when they were having their closing statements. You know, they would say, you know, I'm the only candidate up here with this and this and this. And I felt like there may have been an opportunity lost in the beginning when they could have said, listen, I'm the only candidate, you know, saying this, this, and this on stage. I felt like in the beginning, you know, we went an hour or so and there wasn't, unless you really paid attention, there wasn't that much separation. But maybe I'm missing something. What did you see from your...
No, I think that's right. I think that, you know, for example, all of the answers that we've seen on crime throughout this process, right, have been almost the exact same things, right? There's a desire for more police. There's a desire for tougher prison sentences, right? Like those things really do matter. And on MLG&W, for example, the infrastructure question, they were all pretty much the same. We need to fix our infrastructure, right? Paul Young was really the only candidate who was like, I've talked to Doug McGowan, the current CEO of MLG&W, and this is what we're doing, and it sounds good. Like, I like this plan. And to be honest, I think they were, again, kind of the same and beyond Paul Young, kind of wishy-washy in their support of McGowan. And, you know, again, this is all sort of these things that, to your point, Andrew, they didn't really contrast themselves until the end of the debate. And I guess, like, for someone who's been watching it as much as I have, I saw those contrasts, but maybe to the viewer who is really coming in because they're undecided, because we have a poll today that says 23% of people are undecided, right, from Hart Research. They may not have seen those subtle differences that maybe I'm picking up on, and that's a good point for me.
So Willie Harrington was one of the questions there, and they all essentially had the same kind of responses, and except for Karen Camper. I thought she was the only one that kind of went a little negative, saying that Willie Harrington could have done more as mayor to help the African-American community, and she felt like he had the opportunity and he let everyone down. Everybody else, though, was very positive about Willie Harrington. Do you think, from your perspective, that the candidates did enough to maybe sway a Willie Harrington voter in their camp?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I thought the question itself, when I first heard it, I was like, whoa, that's really being asked. And then I was like, actually, this is a really interesting question, because it was about Willie Harrington's legacy, about the fact that a 5-time mayor who's received the most votes in probably Memphis city history is running again at age 83, and he hasn't shown up. He hasn't really campaigned a ton. And I think, to your point about Karen Camper's question, I think she verbalized what you hear often enough, and Willie Harrington would admit is a key criticism of his legacy, which is there was no generation of leadership no generation, he's 83 years old, and the generations behind him, he did not cultivate a successor. He did not cultivate multiple successors, people that we can look to in the same way we look at NFL coaching trees, say that's the Willie Harrington political tree. He was sort of an island unto himself. And so I think her negativity there was sort of some of the blunt honesty that she's delivered throughout this process, that I think the other candidates were maybe not less, I think, trying to convince Harrington voters to vote for them. At least that's what I saw in their answers. I think they were actually trying to be respectful of Harrington and the base he still has, because he remains, as those answers displayed, an icon in the community. He is a historical Memphis figure, right? Like if there's a Mount Rushmore of Memphis politicians, he probably would be on it. And so I think they had to walk a very fine line there. And that's why they answered the way they did.
I want to point you and get your reaction to, there was one question in the lightning round, the first lightning round, where they asked the candidates one name that they would want in their administration from one of the other candidates that was on stage. And I found it interesting that there was the majority, or at least the name that won, was Karen Camper. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that Karen Camper's, if you watch like the chemistry and sort of the side chatter that happens before the debate and after the debate with candidates, right, which is one of the most things like that I love to watch as sort of a political junkie, everyone likes Karen Camper. She's been very nice. She really hasn't gone after anybody. And she's also, I think, really well respected because she's been around in Memphis politics for a long time. Right. And she really comes from her heart, and she hasn't really pretended to be something she's not. And I think, even when she's been critical of other candidates, she's been very fair about it. And so I think they all like her. And that was an interesting thing to finally kind of see on display.
Something else I thought, perhaps thinking about it, is they would want Karen because she has those connections in Nashville. And something that I thought was maybe undervalued or at least underrated was that, and she mentioned it on stage, was that she's been able to get things done and reach across the aisle in order to do so, in one of those feathers in her cap, so to speak, I guess. One other thing I want to ask you with regards to the 17 people that are on this ballot, and you mentioned earlier 23% undecided still as early voting begins today. How is this? I mean, because you talk to so many people, and they just say, oh, yeah, I think Willie Harrington's going to win because everything else is going to be split amongst the 17 people. I mean, I know that there's a chance that is going to happen, but gosh, is it?
I would say there's a chance. I said this during a radio appearance this week on the Jeff Calkins show, and I'll say it again, right? If we're handicapping this, we should look at it as there are probably four people probably that have a real viable chance of winning this race right now, indicated by all the polling data we've seen, which is Van Turner, Willie Harrington, Floyd Bonner, and Paul Young. The most recent poll that I just cited from Hart Research shows Bonner and Young kind of neck and neck in the lead, right? Young is slightly ahead of Bonner, but within the margin of error. And so there's a chance that Willie Harrington wins this thing, but there's also a chance that he is a really respectable second or really respectable third, right? And I think that if we talk about it, and since we've talked about him a little bit here on this interview, I would say everyone talks about how he hasn't shown up. What if he had shown up? The real question is, if he had shown up and he had shown up on that stage and there were undecided voters that were looking at him and they saw, Willie Harrington and him being combative and him offering a vision of the city, right? Would that have swayed some undecided folks? Would he actually have been able to expand his base if he had campaigned in a more traditional way and not just sort of banked on the name ID and the love of Willie Harrington that still resonates through much of the community? I think that is the question. And I think if he doesn't win this race, that's the question that should be asked.
Final thoughts, Sam? I mean, I've asked my questions. Early voting begins. What are your final thoughts on everything?
Look, I would just say early voting is begin. I would encourage your viewers to go vote. I would encourage people to read all of the and watch all of the things that are out there, whether it's your station, the Daily Memphian, as you can see my logo and the branding behind me, the commercial appeal.
just go read, and there's been some really good journalism done throughout this city about this race and these candidates and the issues facing this city, and educate yourself and then participate in our democracy. We got a long time to go still before October 5th, but people actually get to act on the information that they've obtained today and actually make a decision.
Sam Hardiman, city reporter for the Daily Memphian. Really appreciate you coming back on the digital desk. It's great to see you. I appreciate you weighing in on everything. Thank you.
It's great to be back. Thanks, Andrew.